targeted area-wide plan. It's a project that was funded by Northwest Regional Planning Commission's Brownfield Program. My name's Greta Brunswick. I'm the Brownfield Program Manager there. And what the project did is it looked at redevelopment strategies focusing on Brownfield's project in the Swanton Northern Gateway. And tonight we're going to hear all about the results. This is our consultant team, Peter Fairweather and Denise Rosen, and I'm going to hand it right over to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta. And thanks everybody for coming out tonight on a beautiful night and willing to sit in our presentation. We had the introductions on the agenda. We're going to do an overview of the project, looking at the site conditions, the economic and market analysis, talk about the selection of the catalytic sites that we focused on. There was an area-wide visioning process that we went through, then the conceptual plan and implementation based upon the results of our work, what would be the way to get things moving. And then after that, there'll be opportunities for discussion. And also during the presentation, if you have questions, just feel free to chime right in. And this is our chance to thank the steering committee for working with us on this project. They are here, and I think maybe Suzanne isn't here tonight, but I think everybody else is. And again, it was a good process, and we benefited greatly from their sage counsel and advice, and really helped us in terms of reaching out to people in the community and so on. Whoops. I skipped one, which was the schedule. And the only point of the schedule is, well, we're reached to the end of the process, and we finished up actually in about May or June, but weren't able to schedule the meeting for tonight because of different conflicts. So thank you all for bearing with us, and hopefully it'll be worth the visit. So, again, this was the idea of looking at revitalization of key sites that are in the Village Gateway area that have the potential for contamination, but by participating in the Brownfield program, may be able to be revitalized and serve as catalysts for the economic growth in the Gateway area. And we focused on 3 sites that we'll talk about and gave them some pretty good assessment and some thought in terms of what the community wanted in the area and how those sites could be used to serve that area. So the first is we're going to talk about the existing physical conditions, and I'll turn it over to Dan in a few minutes because he's the guy that actually knows about the real stuff. I just do the marketing and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the ground and physical things, Dan's the man. So let me talk about the 3 sites. Each was chosen for the study because of its the inclusion in the redevelopment effort was consistent with the town plan. There's the potential to combine several parcels into one project, the potential to leverage other resources like special tax credits and grants, and given their location in the Gateway area, the potential to spur revitalization. So this is the Gateway area going across the river, and you can see the 3 areas in green are those sites. The first site is 6 South River Street, the Riviera. Second is 3 Depot Street on the corner of River Street and Merchants Row, Depot Street. And 5 Foundry Street and the lot adjacent to it were the 3 sites we were looking at. So now Dan is going to walk you through the existing conditions, and I'll come back and we'll talk about the market and then the vision process.
So our work with the existing conditions analysis was really to assess what limitations are there that will inhibit growth and redevelopment there. So we took a 5-stage approach. We looked at zoning, natural setting, meaning the physical environment, where the sites and the river interact and what we might have for problems there. The existing infrastructure, water, sewer, etc. Past land use, meaning historical, what was done on these properties in the past and what might have resulted as a function of those past uses to be there now, meaning contaminants and whatnot. And then the environmental conditions. There are a few hazardous waste sites or other managed environmental sites that are within the study area that we need to be kind of cognizant of. So the first being zoning. It's pretty simple area as far as, most of where the catalytic sites are. We're into the neighborhood commercial light, and then we had a little bit of a residential in the green, and in the dark gray here we have the teal is the industrial area where the granary is. But within the tan area, the restrictions that we're looking for, there's a lot of permitted uses, and most of what we're looking at tonight, there are permitted uses. There's nothing that's coming up as problematic there. As far as restrictions, there's a minimum lot size of a 1/4 acre. You're looking at a maximum height of 35 feet or 2.5 stories, which also is not a problem. And then the maximum building coverage on a lot is 30% of the square footage of the building versus the square footage of the lot. The natural setting, you're right on the river. There are portions of the study area that we basically took out of consideration because of issues that we thought of for flooding, primarily the end of Foundry Street, which is the municipally owned cornfield at the end there that's prone to flooding. There is flood considerations along the edges, but it's fairly well restricted in these properties that there's not that much of an issue on the properties that we're looking at. The other things you're seeing on the map up there, we had some endangered species assessment that we performed, and there's been some recorded sightings wounded in the river. Again, probably not a big deal when it comes to doing any development in the site itself, these sites itself. For the infrastructure, the map on the board shows your storm sewer infrastructure, what we refer to as a closed drainage system, which means you have catch basins and you have pipes that take it to the river. So there's not a lot of treatment that's going on. There's probably some places where we could take advantage of some of the existing areas out there and do some stormwater treatment, which would be really helpful for the quality of our river. As far as wastewater treatment goes, you're running about half capacity. You have capacity for 900,000 gallons of wastewater per day. You're running about 450,000. And your Mockland Shore Road water plant is running about 400,000. So it doesn't seem like those are limiting factors at this point. Okay. Moving quickly into the past land use. In front of you have a map of the area in 1877. This is a Beers Atlas. And it's showing a couple of things that I wanted to point out, one of which is this. If you see from Foundry Street, from the river going up into Foundry Street, there is a water course there that is not apparent now, but we can expect to see some issue. There's actually probably some structural infrastructure associated with that old water course, meaning like sluiceways and other things that are possibly problematic when it comes to looking at that site. This site has been subject to industrial uses for the better part of a century and a half. You've had stone cutting, blacksmithing, you had ammunition manufacturing with the Robin Hood ammunition plant, the cartridge plant. You had grain, you still have grain processing, you had more of it within this area, foundering, and then you had, recreational or tourist economy too. You had several hotels right here, and we'll get to that shortly. So the other thing to point out is that the growth in this area was a lot of times you have an intersection of like water transport and rail transport. So rail was very prominent in this area. There were several spurs that we'll get to later when we can talk about some of the specific sites. But railroad in general, when we look at contaminants of concern or potential contaminants of concern, they're kind of a hot topic because there's a lot of maintenance issues that are associated with railways that can lead to contamination issues. Okay. So as far as actually managed environmental sites, there's not very many in this area. You're adjacent to a couple. This is both good and bad. The one that is within is the gas station that's up off of Dewey, which is both a RCRA hazardous waste generator, as it is a managed environmental, managed hazardous waste site that has within its treatment systems and whatnot produces hazardous waste. But it's a petroleum site. It's been in active management for a better part of 2 decades, and it's a pretty well-known situation. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of other sites here that we know past land, like, you know, concretely what's in the ground. So the sites that we do have are limited to releases that are associated with underground storage tanks, and there's not been a lot of assessment that's been done from a brownfield perspective, meaning the past machining or the foundering or the blacksmithing or any of that stuff. So the work that has been done in the study area has been focused on only those contaminants that are related to the petroleum storage tanks. So they didn't look at metals, they didn't look at some of these other contaminants of concern. So we have a bit of an unknown there. So, do you want me to just take this, or do you want? I think we already.
Yeah, no, I think we're good.
We're going to jump ahead. We already talked somewhat about the catalytic sites. We're going to go into further detail about the existing conditions from an environmental perspective for each of these. And these were select. You want to do the selection criteria?
Well, what you can see, we talked about those, and you know, we discussed these.
Somewhat of a duplicate slide.
We had several meetings with the committee to go over this, and again, these are the sites that were shaken out.
So as part of that ranking criteria, we did assess, you know, the environmental condition of these sites, and we produced somewhat of a qualitative ranking system on target sites, and wanted to not necessarily pick the easiest sites for this program, but not necessarily take on all like really hard sites either. So we'll have a kind of a blend, as you'll see. The first site, the Site 1, the 6 South River Street, the Adams House, or the Riviera, this has been in hotel or residential use its entire time. It's an old structure, and so based on the age of the property, we have potential concerns about hazardous building materials here, so asbestos, lead paint, etc. So, and then due to the condition of the building, we have concerns that these contaminants might actually be in the soils that are surrounding the building. So if it was in really good condition, these contaminants might be, you know, within the building materials themselves, but they might be limited to that. So we have, you know, some assessment should be done on whether or not those soils surrounding present a problem. But again, this is not an uncommon occurrence within brownfield sites. Hazardous building materials are within all of the sites we'll be discussing tonight. And again, as a brownfield issue, there are funding sources available for treating these sorts of issues. The next is the 3 Depot, the H.N. Moreau grocery store. This again had a limited amount of commercial, or rather light industrial. They had some carriage manufacturing or fixing and painting kind of functions in the past. But largely it was a grocer, a butcher, that sort of thing. And then, so the contaminants of concern that are related to this are hazardous building materials and maybe some small spills related to the carriage manufacturing. But based on what we've seen on the site and inspections that I've done on the site, it does not appear to be anything more than de minimis, meaning not even reportable. So that really the driver from an environmental perspective, again, will be asbestos and lead. So the last of the existing conditions, the catalytic sites, is the 5 Foundry. We didn't have a historic photo of the 5 Foundry property, but this area of the gateway has been in industrial use, heavy industrial use, for quite a while. Beginning before the turn of the century, when it was the Robin Hood Powder Company, it had a foundry, machine shops, all the ancillary kind of support structure for those manufacturing businesses, fuel storage, and boilers, and coal bins and the rail spurs that service these industries that would have the contaminants of concern related to it. This is actually the site of one of the more famous explosions in town, or events in town. In 1905, there was an explosion. So when you talk about environmental concerns, it doesn't get more drastic than having an explosion in your community. But there's also been more recent land use that's of concern, automotive maintenance and repair and that sort of things that would have other contaminants of concern, chlorinated solvents, for instance, or petroleum or metals contamination related to that. We are not out of the woods when it comes to hazardous building materials here, asbestos, lead, those sorts of things. And one of the other things that we do know about this site is that in the middle of summer last year, 2016, there was an unknown discovery of petroleum. There was actually a sheen that was observed on the river right outside this plant. And so we don't know the source of that sheen, and there's probably some amount of residual contamination associated with wherever that came from. That, based on the sluiceways and the old foundations, could be complicated to try to assess. Okay. We'll go back to the market.
Yes, thanks, Dan. So, that's sort of the physical condition of the properties, and in a sense, it's kind of a mixed picture, with two of the sites being associated with the kind of contamination expected in any old structure, and the other boundary, because if it's industrial use, there might be things a bit more complicated. The other aspect of this is, we looked at what are the physical conditions, then also we did some market analyses. And I'm going to talk about the results of those. If you want to look at the full analysis and actually the full report, you can go to the website, swantonplan.com, and you can download the full report, which has got all the glorious tables and graphs and every fun thing that you want to read in terms of marketing. But we looked at 4 analyses. We looked at regional cluster analysis. What are the strong and growing industries in Franklin County? A local industry analysis. What are the types of businesses that Swanton successfully supports? And then we looked at the retail analysis, which looked at what are the opportunities for retail business in the area. Are there segments of the population that are being underserved? Are there kinds of businesses that would be a good place that would do well being located in Swanton? And then lastly, housing analysis. What's the unmet demand for housing? And I'll give you some of the summary results that we found. That the potential opportunities in the Franklin County area appear to be focused in distribution, not surprising given the highway infrastructure here. Business-related services, which could be accounting, bookkeeping, those kinds of services. Advanced manufacturing, that's strong throughout the county. Agribusiness, and the last one, which I think speaks particularly for the Gateway area, is niche retail and tourism. And the idea here is, when we looked at the retail analysis, if you looked at the major categories like general merchandise or apparel or things like that, there were no clear slam dunks. But it's clear that there were pockets of demand where if you had the right kind of business that had provided a specialty product, and I'm sort of making this up, but for example, kayaking supplies. If you tried to do a little version of Dick's Sporting Goods, where you serve the general public with all kinds of sporting goods, you're not likely to succeed because there's competition, within 40 minutes of the big boxes that make that tough. But if you look at service-related industries that specialize in certain products or provide a lot of expertise and service in their sales staff, they're likely to succeed. And you can probably all think of businesses in the Swanton area where that's the case, where there are businesses that have been doing well for years, and it's because they've carved out a niche, they've got good customer service. And those are the kinds of businesses that can still succeed in the area, and we would expect could possibly succeed in the Gateway area as those buildings come online. And again, the other side of that we looked at was the housing analysis. And there are housing opportunities in Swanton when you look at the demographics for seniors and also sort of starter working housing for young couples that are just getting their start in the working world, that are looking for entry-level housing, apartments in particular. And that not all the sites in the gateway are suitable to meet housing demands given the traffic and the configuration of the area. But it's still a possibility. The other thing that can happen as we get more economic development activity in the area, that will help in terms of housing affordability, because among other things it helps keep the tax rates under control, provides additional employment opportunities for people in the area. And also at the same time, the more you get greater housing choices, that also can help with economic development, and that there are more people that are living in the area that might patronize the local stores. So getting that mix right in terms of the business opportunities and also the housing opportunities is generally a good idea in Swanton, but also something we need to think about in terms of the Northern Gateway. There are opportunities for specialty retail and hospitality and possibly housing.
Sure. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Having lived here practically all my life, and experiencing business in Vermont, I believe that Vermont is not particularly business friendly.
Okay.
And
I've heard that.
I can't remember where. But in any event, how much of those factors that we don't have a lot of control of should we work on a little bit, or factors that a lot of people don't understand? Swanton had some pretty substantial industry here.
Mm-hmm.
So didn't St. Albans, so didn't Albert. And that went away, not through any of our doing, but it seems to me that the biggest wonderful thing that could happen to the community of Swanton is some 50 to 100 person businesses to locate here. Mm-hmm. Everything would spur from that. More housing, better schools, other peripheral businesses, everything. So I was thinking about that for a long time, and I understand there's a lot of unrecognized skills here too. Mm-hmm. The machinist skills, but with the Vermont Precision Tool.
Yep.
There's a nice technical school right in St. Albans to train kids and opportunities for technical jobs. And it seems like, boy, I would love to find a way, a strategy to go and try to entice those type of companies to look at Swanton. Mm-hmm. We're right on the interstate, we're right next to the border. Mm-hmm. We have we got a railroad bed here. There's a lot of things that would be attractive to a business that was going to manufacture something that needs to distribute it. A way to make that aware to the world and say, come look at Swanton.
Mm-hmm. And the process is somewhat underway with the regional economic development folks. But I think you've defined the problem pretty well. One of the constraints we're under is the geography that we're looking at, the Northern Gateway. There's just not the real estate there to house the kinds of businesses. That would be a little further out near where Vermont Precision Tools is and so on. That being said, I think some of the other opportunities, because it's going to take a while to get to the 20 to 50 range. But in the meantime, there are going to be a number of opportunities in the 5 employee range to 10 employee range, and you can't take those for granted, because you've got to use a sports metaphor, you got to hit a few singles and doubles, and they can't all be home runs. Because in the rural economic development world, a 50-job firm is a home run, just about anywhere in the Northeast.
So yeah, if I could just add to that, Chris, Peter, probably better use, the purpose of the grant was to focus in an area.
Right.
And the area that was chosen was that Northern Gateway. So understanding that a lot of what you said is very accurate, but when you're trying to narrow the focus.
These gentlemen travel and see other places. I thought maybe there were some bigger picture things that might be appropriate.
Well,
we have what drives me nuts is in our area is we have Border Patrol, Customs, these areas, and those people don't live here. They travel in here. Why don't they live here? You know, little things like that.
No, it's understandable. But, you know, as Red was pointing out, we were assigned the Northern Gateway to look at that. And the other thing I want to keep in mind, though, is thinking about the Northern Gateway as a catalyst, the extent to which those things can move forward, it kind of sets the table to think about the type of economic development you'd mentioned. It's a little bit larger scale. The small successes, and you know, I've seen this throughout the Northeast, those small successes pave the way, so eventually the bigger boys will say, oh, what's going on in Swanton? Because there are a lot of little companies here that are doing well.
Yeah, and I'd say that if you're talking about the All Precision Tools, I'm pretty sure they started with 2 people in a garage, and then they expanded to out by that area, then they expanded to that. So I really think that the best, if we want another VPT, we really need to support those small business people who are struggling, get some networking going so that they can have some resources. There's a lot of free resources that we could provide with that to them so that they can maybe get that leg up in the business so that they can take what they're already crafting and grow it and give them that support. And then once they realize how great it is to be here, they're going to be infested to want to stay here, and they'll grow to that 20, 40, 50, 100.
I know, we have the food industry here too.
Yeah, and that's another one that's a good opportunity. But just to keep in mind, 80% of all jobs created in any local economy come from existing employers. So, you know, just because somebody's here doesn't mean, you don't take it for granted, because there's always potential for more growth.
Thank you.
But let's continue on, because you know, I think those were good good observations. And actually, just to reinforce this, Swanton is a competitive location for a variety of economic activities. You know, and we've identified for the large area of food and advanced manufacturing. But thinking now about the Northern Gateway, we need to think about, all right, what are the sorts of opportunities we can tap into? So, you know, it leads to 2 other questions. What's the community's vision for these opportunities, and what will be required to prepare the sites to capture that potential development? And that's what we're going to focus on now. The next 2 segments of this is sort of what do we learn through the community visioning, and then what do we do to take advantage of the opportunities that are defined. So on the 24th of January, we had a community session to lay out the vision. We had 19 participants, and again, there's a fuller description of the process in the full report. This is just an example of some of the results when we asked folks about what they saw as important aspects of development. Improve the ability of the area to attract jobs and economic activity. You know, that was very important for a lot of folks. Improve the appearance of the area to attract tourists and new residents, also important. Maximize the area's contribution to the grand list was seen as something that was important, but clearly the catalytic nature of these sites was really what's on people's minds. How do we use them to help jumpstart the economy? So what we did is we asked the participants for their thoughts. We divided them into 4 groups, and they were each given maps of the Northern Gateway with the 3 catalytic sites highlighted, and they were asked to evaluate different images for the potential uses we identified in the market analysis: restaurant, retail, housing, services, and manufacturing. In other words, for those kinds of uses, what would you want it to look like? And now we can show you sort of where people, as groups, thought about things. For example, for the first site, 6 South River Street, the old River, we asked the 4 groups about, you know, what would they want it to look like. And we had some pre-existing photographs of different kinds of development. This isn't obviously the Riviera. This is somewhere else in these great United States of ours. But they're examples of what development could look like. And so these are the images that came up. They're kind of traditional, turn-of-the-century New England images. Group 1 was thinking about a combination of housing and a restaurant. Housing for Group 2, more classic in character with surroundings. Consider senior housing must be pedestrian-friendly. Group 3, they chose a similar image, looks like historic restored property, lodging, restaurant, bed and breakfast, restaurant, bar, rebuild what is there to restore the original look. Group 4, a possible office on the first floor with limited residential above. Again, a different image, but still reinforcing that kind of classic turn of the past century character, consistent with the historical nature of Swanton.
Excuse me, were the people who participated in that, were they local investors and business people?
It was the cross-section of the community.
Cross-section, okay.
Yeah, and actually the list of attendees is in the full report.
Okay.
So we looked at 3 Depot Street. Again, people had a series of images, and for group 1, they were looking at retail, cafe, sandwich shop, with offices on the second floor, possibly. Again, you can see this. The sort of image they chose is, again, that classic historical image. Retail with kind of a country store mystique. Group 3, retail, specialty retail, recreation-oriented, canoes, bikes, etc., that kind of specialty sports. And then Group 4, retail, color, modern-looking, mixed-use, restaurant, retail, use, or office. So those are the sorts of things that people were looking at for the 3 Depot Street site. And then for the 5 Foundry site, when asked about it, again, you can see the images tend to look kind of classical, pedestrian-oriented, New England-style images. Group 1, retail, combine outdoor space with retail, canoe, kayaks, and bikes. Restaurant with the outdoor effect overlooking the river. Group 2, restaurant, outdoor patio space overlooking the river, landscaping toward the river road, services, offices, a park. Group 3, the waterworks in Winooski was given as an example, the marina in Brattleboro, microbrewery or mixed-use specialty shops. Group 4, microbrewery, a barbecue. That idea of a mini park or a pocket park, and maybe even a rotary in the intersection there. So that gives you a sense of some of the, when people were thinking about these areas, they were thinking in the historical context of Swanton. The other thing we asked them is, what wouldn't you want to see? And the kinds of images that people didn't want to see were sort of the generic, sort of late 20th century, mid 20th century, highway-oriented kinds of uses. You know, these are the ones, at the end of the session, you know, put up the images that you still have that you wouldn't want to see in the gateway. And, you know, it's sort of, it was kind of green. All the tacky-looking things, you know, at the end went up on the wall saying, "Don't do that." So that was encouraging. So now what we're going to, you know, we went back and took this information and also worked with EDR, which is the landscape architecture group out of Syracuse that does a lot of this kind of imaging, and said, all right, so what should we come up with then in terms of a plan for this area? And so this gives you the little square that just showed up. That's the conceptual plan. I'm going to blow it up now so you can sort of see what we're talking about here. You know, Site 1, the redevelopment of the historic Adams Hotel, is a mixed-use building with professional offices and residential units on the upper level. Site 2, 3 Depot Street, redevelopment of the corner building into a takeout restaurant with seating along the banks of the river. And then the Site 3, the 5 Foundry, redevelopment of the old Foundry site into a mixed-use building with retail, commercial restaurant, professional offices, maker spaces, and a river walk, and the open space associated with the redevelopment into kind of a pocket park with sidewalks, crosswalks, tree planting, and an open space green edge. So now I'm going to show you what that means in terms of the properties themselves. So this is the Riviera in its current condition, and as envisioned by our process, it would look something like this. You know, restored to the old look of the Adams Hotel. But the idea, again, consistent with the visioning we did, historic in character, high quality appearance, and you can see how that would change the perception of that area. Walking, you know, into that area, driving through that area, and seeing this instead creates a different impression of Swanton. Something more in keeping with this historic character. Site 2, you know, this is where we are today, or at least earlier this year, before the leaves came out. And again, based on what we heard, thinking about, all right, how can this be reconfigured to look more like historic buildings, and also that the lot next to it, again, is given a little streetscape here with some plantings. So start to integrate the, that lot into the neighborhood, and again, returning that building to its historic use. And again, it's just kind of fun to go back and forth.
So, excuse me, do you take into account parking and access for this little takeout restaurant?
Some of the thinking behind that it might involve potential acquisition of an adjoining property to make for some parking. So that's the second site, the Depot Street site. Last but not least is 5 Foundry, and you can see this is the one. It's the biggest. It's got the most complex environmental challenges based on its legacy as manufacturing. But you know, based on what we heard from the community as far as the sorts of uses they were looking towards, you know, this is kind of the vision of the place. As you can see the river walkway, you know, available as possibly a restaurant, also even offices, and in the far end here, possibly even maintaining industrial uses on the site, light industry, maker spaces, you know, with the 3D printing and all that kind of stuff. So the building is large enough to accommodate that kind of use, but a lot of the focus on this, again, is making sure that its character speaks to the historic nature of Swanton, and also tries to tap into the opportunities for niche retail and hospitality and tourism. So again, you know, this is currently, and this is what would be envisioned. So you can see it's a noticeable difference in each of these.
What do we do to encourage investors to make that happen?
Comes to the next. Now we're going to talk about implementation.
Pay later.
Can we back up no, not the slide. I just wanted to mention that when we did the visioning process, we did focus on those 3 sites as you suggested, but it was hard not to, and we did emphasize how important the connection between the village and all of this new development would be. Mm-hmm. So the streetscape improvements that you showed there would have to extend so that we had a connected and walkable.
Yeah. So that, you know, it's important to think about what happens here.
Yeah.
So you can start to build synergy between this location and the downtown area.
There are plans down the road for rebuilding that bridge. It was 1962.
Okay. So, and that's the importance of doing exercises like this, because as that comes into the queue, to be able to say, all right, we need to think about this in terms of the streetscape, not only just the vehicular connections. So, some thoughts about implementation. First of all, it's really important to think about the partnerships. And this may seem obvious, it may seem easy, but it's a really critical step, and you can't emphasize enough to start reaching out to the different organizations that have a stake in the area, that could be potential sources of assistance. You know, obviously the Planning Commission has been instrumental in moving this process forward, and would continue to be a great resource for the community. The Department of Environmental Conservation, you know, the brownfields are part of what they do, and so they need to be part of this ongoing discussion. Transportation, I understand there's some transportation issues involved in the Gateway area in terms of trucks and things like that. So clearly, you know, it's in their sites, they've done some work there, and they may be able to come back and help out in some other ways. The Agency for Commerce and Community Development, in terms of some of the potential funding sources they have, and we'll mention those when we get into a few more of the details. The Vermont Economic Development Authority, in terms of some financial support they may be able to bring to bear. The Northern Border Regional Commission, which has done, I just heard some data on the radio coming, something like $5 million worth of projects over the last 6 years, and now the question is, it's not clear that they're going to survive. but an important contributor to economic vitality in the northern border regions. The Northern Vermont Economic Development District, which is the conduit for federal EDA money, and the Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation, which provides tax incentives for businesses, and the Champlain Housing Trust. As you look at questions of senior housing and other things like that, they're going to be an important resource. And last but far from least, local businesses and property owners. So, keeping a dialogue open between the town and these players about, here's what we're thinking about doing. What do you see as your potential role in this? What do you think would be the next logical steps? Just starting the conversation is a big step in moving things forward. And then we're going to go through some of the action plans for implementation, some of the more formal things. And what we've tried to do for each of them is indicate the timing, which agency or organization should be the lead, or in some cases we suggest there are several that might be able to do that, who are the partners, and what funding could be used for this. And again, with the timing, it's short-term actions are within 2 years, midterm actions 3 to 5 years, long-term actions 5 to 10 years. And that's the other thing to keep in mind is the complete turnaround process for any area in terms of economic development. 30? Yeah, I mean, it might be a little quicker than that,
well,
too.
If you look at
yeah, no, I mean, it's a generational exercise, and it's important to keep that in mind, because it's easy to, get all excited about this. 2 years from now, only a little bit has been done, you go, we failed. It's just, you're just getting started, because the fast turnarounds are 10 years. But, that shouldn't, it's like turning a battleship. It shouldn't be, it's a complicated thing, and as long as the process keeps moving and people remain committed, it still remains possible.
Are the partners the owners of the property?
They are certainly key partners in this,
Is
yes.
that what they're, is that weird? That's
well, in different actions that we're going to go through, we'll identify different partners. But throughout this whole process, the owners of the property are key partners. Even if I fail to mention them in the steps, you should think of them as important.
You did, but they were at the bottom, and I would have thought they would be at the top.
Yes, all right. Well noted. I can revise that before I post this and put them on the top, because they are the cornerstone to the effort, and the relationship between the town, the village, the property owners, and other businesses in the community are going to be the foundation for success. So again, as we talked about, the first step in implementation is building the partnerships, creating a regular meeting of the key partners. And the town and the village can do this, and including all the organizations listed above on the partnerships for implementation slide, except for the fact that the businesses and the property owners will be listed first, of course. And funding, you don't need a lot of money to do this, but it's really a key step. There was some major redevelopment that took place in North Creek, New York, up in near Gore Mountain, up in the Adirondacks. There was a group called the Friday Morning Club, and they would basically, concerned citizens, they would sit down every Friday morning to see how they're doing in terms of revitalization. The town supervisor said it was the one meeting he would never miss. He would miss a town select board meeting rather than miss the Friday Morning Club, because this is where they really kept the development process moving. Another is to look at planning and regulatory changes. And Dan went through, and it doesn't look like there are going to be a lot of changes required in the existing zoning to allow the kinds of uses we're talking about. But it's probably worth going through that. The other thing that we would suggest taking a look at is the notion of putting together development guidelines for what you want the built form to look like. And that probably could be a village-wide or town-wide thing. And they don't have to be mandatory. I mean, they can be if you want them to be. But even more important is to just provide a clear suggestion to developers. This is what we'd like in projects. So that, because virtually any developer I've ever talked to said, in some sense, it doesn't matter whether the standards are high or low, as long as they're clear and consistent. And, you know, the town, wherever the town is, gives a clear sense of, this is the kind of development we want, this is the kind of development we don't want. And then people, you know, developers know what to do with that kind of information. It's you know, those communities where, well, just make it nice, and we'll tell you when you're halfway through whether it's nice or not. You know, that doesn't work. So that's something to consider. I think that in terms of zoning, it looks like things are in pretty good shape, but the idea of thinking about development guidelines, not only for the Northern Gateway, but possibly for the whole village area, is something to consider. Now we're going to talk about the actual redevelopment of the sites. And I just want to emphasize again the importance of 5 Foundry Seat. It's in some ways the most important because it's kind of the biggest and most visible of the sites, but it's also the most complex and challenging. So the first thing in terms of starting to redevelop the sites, maybe to convene a townwide economic development summit to reach out to developers, landowners regarding development options and potential resources. Sort of bring the community together and say, all right, here's what we're trying to do. And, you know, who wants to play? What roles do you want to play? Who are the other partners that can help us? And just try to get everybody on the same page in terms of here are the opportunities. And it may focus on the Northern Gateway. It could also include other projects in town that are important for the economy. But just bring the community together along with developers and landowners to talk about what's possible and what we want. Prepare market studies, if applicable, and the graphic just shows you know, different drive times that can be used in a market study. And you know, there may be a situation where a developer comes forward with a particular use and needs a little more confirmation. You know, we've done some market research in our work, but you know, it's kind of more generic. If somebody's got a particular use, it might be necessary to work with folks either at the Industrial Development Corporation, the town and the village, to move that forward, to look to, for example, the Commerce and Community Development to provide a community development block grant, planning grant, to help move the market study and feasibility study forward for a particular project or a particular use. Again, as part of redevelopment of the catalytic sites, talk about developing streetscape improvements for the Northern Gateway. Again, that's the 3 to 5 year time frame, the town taking the lead on that, working with the Planning Commission, VTrans, Commerce and Community Development, Northern Border Regional Commission, the possible funding the bicycle and pedestrian program or transportation alternatives through VTrans. So to move that forward in terms of streetscape. And then the other thing is to start to possibly consider the acquisition of key properties. Again, 3 to 5 year time frame, maybe even sooner. Could be led by the Economic Development District, the town and village, the Industrial Development Corporation, working with potential funders. And you know, one of the potential sources could be community development block grant implementation grants, loans from the Vermont Economic Development Authority. But you know, again, as it looks like there are key sites that could be acquired to help a developer gain control of the site or get the site ready for preparation and marketing to the developer, these are one of the ways that that could be done. And then as the sites come into play, then to start to do the due diligence in terms of the brownfield process to make sure the contamination is taken care of, to do the first phase of detailed examination of the contaminations, and to put the property into the brownfield revitalization economic liability
Limitation Act.
Liability Limitation Act. That's the BRELA, which basically gives properties that are eligible for that, the state provides kind of protection against liability in exchange for a commitment to go forward and clean up the contaminations. And you can see there's, again, the partners and the funding that would be involved in that. And then the last step would be to basically finish the process with the brownfield cleanups, do the phase 2 and complete the cleanups, get the property ready for redevelopment. So it's, you know, it's kind of 2 phases involved in this. There's the marketing side of it, getting the developers interested, and at the same time, at the appropriate time, to be able to say, okay, now we can bring in the funding to get the brownfield issues resolved for any of these sites. So that's the process that we've been through together, looking at the Northern Gateway. And again, there's some real exciting opportunities. You know, are they going to happen overnight? Probably not, especially, you know, if we're talking about 6 months or something like that. Is this something that's likely to happen over the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years? You know, there are real possibilities there. But again, some of that is just making the decision to move forward and sticking with it. And you know, that's a general rule of economic development, by the way, is just decide to make a commitment, set a direction, and stick with it. And even if the thing you plan to have happen doesn't happen, something just as good or better will. Just by the fact of making a commitment and sticking to the idea of, you know, we're going to make the improvement, we're going to make this process work to bring greater economic vitality for the community. So questions, comments, reactions? And again, you know, you can go to the website, download the full report. There's also a link at the website to the story map that Dan and Sun Environmental put together, which has got all of the maps that Dan showed in the environmental side and some other great bits of information.
On your partner list, USDA, Rural Development, as well as the Vermont Community Foundation.
Okay, yes. Yeah, and I believe the USDA just got left off this list. I think it's in the report. If it's not, it will definitely
abbreviated. It's abbreviated on the presentation. There's a couple others.
Yeah, but the Community Foundation, I don't think was mentioned, and that's a great source. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
For office space, I mean, is there any consideration, I mean, they're not going to come down as an industry, but having maybe Canadian businesses that need a Vermont presence for just, you know, office space?
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible. And I know that that's something that they're seeing at the county level. There's all kinds of interest in just sort of getting across the border and having a presence. Typically, they'll want a little bit more than the spaces that are available here. And they also, you know, they like, in those cases, greenfield sites where they can throw up a building that serves their purposes really quickly. But you never know. And, you know, that again, this is important why it's good to keep the regional economic development folks aware of what's happening in Swanton, because they're talking to those people all the time. And there may be somebody that says, I just need a foothold. If there's a small office space that we could just get, you know, a lease for, that could be an opportunity for the Gateway area. Yes?
There's a lot of potential for Swanton. Anybody put together a list for this stuff? I mean, the amount of traffic, the number of people that pass through here, opportunities to get people to stop. Its proximity to the river, and it's kind of pretty. It's flat. You can bicycle here. You know, it's kind of nice along the lake. There's an airport close by that's probably going to expand. The interstate's right here. You can get here. It seems to me like some kind of list like that that's on other places besides our website.
Marketing.
You know, marketing basically of Swanton. Swanton has a lot to offer that a lot of towns in Swanton and Vermont and New York State just don't have.
If I may, sorry, I'm trying to take notes and all of that. That is on my list to do. I think that there is an opportunity to market our natural resources, our infrastructure, from a business standpoint, our energy, our electric rates, those kind of things. I think, you know, putting that together the FCIDC that I work for 1 day a week has done it on they have a cross-border map for Franklin County, and to do something very similar for
I know
Franklin
Tim
County.
Smith knows all this stuff.
Right, it's just
It's
putting
just
it.
the idea of finding a way to get it out there.
Right,
So
and
some
that's-
entrepreneur with a great idea would think, man, I want a corner location where lots of people are going by.
Right, and that
Yeah.
was.
And the municipal planning grant funding round coming up, what might be a great funding source for a marketing or branding plan for the village, that might be a next step to take.
And certified local government. Great. Yeah. That's on my radar.
It, should you come, the Economic Development Summit, when that's ready, that is something the municipal planning grant would also be a good funding source for that.
Yeah.
Are there any business owners here who would like to share their thoughts or ask questions of these properties?
Yeah, are there any business owners here?
My family and I started to invest in the Swanton area a few years ago with a vision of the future in the surrounding area. And there's a number of things that attracted us to this area. Number one was the downtown park, the proximity to the rivers, the proximity to the lakes, the borders, the interstate, so on and so forth, and the fact that we have some of the busiest intersections within the state. So this is a reality, folks. If you take a look at St. Albans 5 years ago, where St. Albans was, and in St. Albans we also own a number of different properties. 5 years ago, what's happened there was not even a dream. And in the last 5 years, and the reason that that's happened is they made the decision to move forward and they stuck with it.
Yeah.
And that is what's key here. And who would have ever, when they all came and started talking about this, I said, this is all BS, quite frankly. I said, the fact of the matter is, we've been talking about the Federal Street Connector for 10 years, and nothing has happened. And then, all of a sudden, the Ace Hardware thing started, or the State Building, the Ace Hardware, the hotel, all of Main Street being revitalized, the park. So what can happen in a very short period of time is astronomical, provided that the decision is made to move forward in the continuous push.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. Every place I've worked that's been successful, that's what's made it a success. The consultant would love to take credit for it, but it's the local leadership saying, no, we're not stopping. We're going to keep moving. Any other comments, suggestions?
Who makes that decision, just that we move forward? How does that, who's the one that says, okay, yeah, we're doing it?
You are.
And I mean, the community did just decide to hire an economic development coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is one showing of the community deciding that economic development is important to them, and they want to move forward. It's just, that's my observation from the Regional Planning Commission, that it seems that Swanton wants to move forward and is starting to figure out how to do that in terms of making a commitment.
Just looking for the grant, applying for the grant, and having it come to us to have this presentation is a decision to want to move forward also.
And the other,
How do you continue that effort?
yeah, and the other thing that really catalyzed it was the community visit.
Yes.
And I think that started this process, and it is moving forward. And the secret, how do you keep it moving forward, is just jump on. Just find out who's doing the stuff and just show up and say, I'm here to help.
I'm glad you mentioned the community visit, because Swanton has been moving forward and we've been doing it very well. At one of your meetings, you talked about the importance of, and I agree 100%, it's all about relationships. I really like the idea of the Friday morning club. This gentleman sitting next to Gordon, who I don't even know, had some really good ideas.
Heck of a nice guy.
I'm guessing that you're the gentleman that bought the rib?
No,
No. See, well,
the opposite side.
Yeah.
Catalyst site number 2.
okay. Oh, yeah, the corner store. Well, when you were mentioning St. Albans and their momentum, and you talked about the Ace Hardware, we've already got that coming into Swanton.
That's what I hear.
That's a really good start.
But that's not the Northern Gateway.
Close.
No, but it's,
You got a foot in that too, though.
you know, it's a big boost, and it's the anchor that we need. So anyway, all of that to say, it would be just great to have a Friday morning or a Tuesday morning or a time where all of the merchants and the folks get together. And maybe it wouldn't even have to be once a week.
Right, could be a monthly thing.
Or it could be every other week. But just to get together, form those relationships, know one another, and run with it.
We have a history of that. The Chamber of Commerce used to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You could count on it. At least once a month, there would be a gathering of people at a local restaurant. Sometimes it was in that one up there on the left. Didn't look like.
Uh-huh.
It's a real.
Yeah, and I think that's, and again, not everybody has to show up at every meeting either, but just, a core group that just meets and congratulates themselves and moves forward and kicks each other in the butt when it's needed, that kind of stuff. It makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
I've kind of come in at the end here, but I commend you for what you've done and really the leadership of Swanton, the village and the town, and how they're seeing the future and wanting to jump on projects like this and a catalyst. The thing to make this work, and for the developers like Norm or in David's building, the easiest way to get anyone to do it is bring them a tenant. They need someone to rent that spot. Dave Fosgate's building looks incredible, and he certainly could do it, but he's not going to do it empty and hope someone comes.
Right.
He needs 80% of it. Well, I'm speaking for Dave, but he needs 80%. Someone's going to need 80% of it filled before they take it. Then they might take a chance on the other 20, but they're not going to take a chance on 100% of that building to make it look good, to only have it sit.
Yep.
Sit down.
That's right. That's part of the marketing side. There's got to be the marketing side. And also, especially with the 5 Foundry Street, it's large enough that a lot of the existing uses can stay there, even if you're thinking about new uses, which is kind of, there's some real challenges, and this is true for the Gateway area as well. There's some real challenges, but some real intriguing opportunities, and it's just going to take partnerships.
But if someone wants to move it along quickly, I would bet that if you bring a tenant to Norm tomorrow, he would start by Monday, maybe Tuesday, but he would get started
I
pretty
think
quickly.
that's a great add to the discussion. We need to think about, all right, how do we bring the businesses to the properties? And, again, the discussion with developers and coordinating all this. Say, all right, this is underway. We've identified some potential sources of support. Let's talk about the timing on this and how we make it work. It's a little complicated getting all that stuff to work, but it happens all the time.
Now, how about instant, availability? I could see an amazing opportunity on the Foundry Street to do art studio spaces, in that, warehouse kind of working artist kind of areas. But you talked about the brown space concerns and all the lead paint and all that other stuff. How ready are those spaces to be occupied?
You mean
Is
for
that
other
specific?
artists? Come on out.
Hey, come on. We're already dying from all the other materials.
There's all kinds of heavy metals.
Right?
No, but that's a good example of being clear about what the timing needs to be.
Right.
Because one of the things you don't want to do is to drum up a bunch of interest and not have the
a
property
stable
ready.
foundation to move forward. You can't get a bunch of people interested and find out that, it's 3 years from now.
Right.
And they kind of find other places to go instead. So that's what I was curious about. Is that individually just getting in touch with the people that own those properties and speaking with them about a vision of what might be?
Well, I mean, it's also possibly bringing in someone who's done a project of similar scale somewhere else, who said, all right, you know, I can recruit the tenants if I can get this kind of time frame to turn things around and say, all right, let's see if we can get funding sources now, if you're willing to do that, to help this move, and will it move in that time frame? And if it's not, then all right, how do we coordinate this so that we catch the next wave?
So just to understand, when they talk about brownfields and hazards and stuff, and Dan, you can help me out with this. We're not talking drop dead hazardous situations here in these buildings. Okay, they're environmental concerns, environmental hazards, but they're not drop dead hazards that you walk in and you're going to roll 3 heads tomorrow.
Yeah, the definition of a brownfield site is a property whose development is either thwarted by real or perceived contamination.
If it's disrupted versus like if you were to go into one of your spaces and redo an area and make it into just an example, again, studio space, that's already accessible space that can be used in that situation.
So we're dealing with a few unknowns.
Yeah.
And there's never been an assessment on any one of these properties that I'm aware of, and we've done a lot of work on. So the first step is, should a developer or should a prospective buyer be identified for any of these that wants to, if Housing Vermont or Champlain Housing comes in and we want to do a project in Swanton, the Riviera is a great one. Let's do it. The first thing they're going to do is a phase 1 environmental site assessment to assess whether or not, they're going to take what we've done as a great first step to, fill out all the forms and check the boxes and complete the phase 1 assessment, and then hire an asbestos contractor to come through and look at and do an assessment and inventory and come up with a cleanup plan, and has to go through all the...
And I said there's grants for those kind of, because someone's got to pay someone to do that.
So one of the onuses of the study is a way to kind of feed sites into Greta's brownfield program, is identify some sites that can be that can take advantage of assessment funds, either through the Regional Planning Commission, which has a hazardous assessment grant, and the petroleum assessment grant, or some of the other assessment grants that are held by the state. There's Section 128 funds that are held by the state to do assessment and cleanup. Okay. And those would be the next step, is to actually do the testing, and then come up with a remedial strategy that will be based on the redevelopment. So if it's housing, that's going to have a pretty high bar for cleanup. If it's going to stay in an industrial use, you have a different scenario and a different exposure, timing and all that, different dosage and all that. So the cleanup standards for housing are more stringent than industrial.
And just quick, one of the things that this study does is it sort of cues these properties up, so that when they're ready to go to the brownfield program, it's not a surprise and it's clear why they're going there.
It's when there's a property transfer that that you're going to find that these environmental assessments and the environmental process will start. There's things that trigger it at the property transfer level, and there's certain liability protections that new property owners can avail themselves of by doing assessments.
Right. Current property owners can enter into the brownfield program as well. It's just they don't have as many benefits. So it is definitely geared towards the transaction, at the time of the transaction.
CHT did look at the RIB several years ago, and they passed it up.
Mm-hmm. So just a quick PSA. So let's say I'm a building owner and I want to have an assessment done. Stone Environmental could possibly do an assessment. Is that correct? Consult?
Sure.
So agencies like you could do consultation for property owners.
Sure. Greta has a list of consultants that she has contracts with that would be more than willing to do that. But for the RIV and 3 Depot, I mean, you have to do the checkbox on the phase 1 to satisfy your what's called all appropriate inquiry as part of your due diligence when you buy a property. But like I said, there's very little, in my opinion, there's very little environmentally to assess actually take samples for and analyze for, except for the asbestos and lead. So that would be part of the phase 2 would be mostly a building materials assessment. On the 5 foundry, on the other hand, it'll be, there'll be a more stringent assessment with probably some borings, maybe looking at some different matrices, soils, groundwater, et cetera.
Let me go back to the first incident too that was mentioned about the Sheen in the river. I mean, it was quite an in-depth investigation done during that.
Yeah, it was quite, they couldn't find it.
Yeah, and they pretty much, well, I believe they determined it was not coming from that property.
It wasn't coming from the building.
Correct. Correct.
In my opinion, I don't know, this is just my take on it, is that it probably followed either a storm line from somewhere else and discharged to the sluiceway, and that just shows up in the river right there, or it's a, who knows? But there's a lot of unseen infrastructure in that area that's causing we call them preferential pathways for contaminants. So, where you see it is not where it was necessarily spilled. Good point.
I believe we got to focus on tonight is what Norm and Gordon were saying. That was the statement of the evening. You got to make a plan. And whether we got to jar our memory here. We have a plan. We started a couple of years ago. We had 200 people at our gathering previous to the Swanton enhancement move. And so we have a plan. And this meeting here is part of the plan. Yep. To improve the property that is in question so that it'll be more saleable or leasable for the property owners. And like Norm says, we got to stick with the plan, because St. Albans is a perfect example of that. They had a good group together. They still got a good group together that are really putting St. Albans together. And Swanton is following up on that, really. Yeah. Because the Swanton enhancement movement is doing a lot of these things, like Chris is saying about selling our community. They're working on that, and they're working on walkability, bikeability. They're working on a lot of it. But like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. Yep. But the plan is there.
Yep. And that's, again, it all fits together, because that comes back to, all right, how do you make this place attractive for tenants? Clearly the building has to work, but then it's also the community. The extent to which it's a walkable community and all this great stuff is going on, it's a lot easier to say, oh yeah, I could see having a business here. So, all this stuff helps with making it a competitive location for businesses.
And Tim Smith from Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation has told us time and again, if you have the space, I can fill it. But we don't have the space. Right. So we have to generate or improve the space to have it available.
Are those statements based on the Canadian warehousing office type situation?
Yeah.
So I think it's one, and I keyed into this, the comment that you, sir, I don't know your last name, but you were referred to as Chris, so I'm just going to call you Chris. I wouldn't normally call you Chris. But Chris mentioned, trying to do a recruitment kind of, a 50 to 100 employer kind of thing, and recruitment is tough. You guys are in a good position because of that aspect of the position relative to the border and with the location with the interstate and whatnot. But that's one kind of trident, one spear of the trident. The other is having the homegrown businesses. The maker space is just as vital. I think that's huge. It's a big component of that redevelopment strategy in that property.
So there's just, if I could say to Peter, thank you for all the work that you've done, Dan, in this. There's a lot more data in that website, a ton of data. I mean, you could spend hours in there. There's a lot of stuff you guys put together. So visit that website.
Yeah, it's really, the story map is really cool. I'm so jealous that I can do that. It's really cool stuff. Just two things. Next steps in the report, there's a schedule that sort of lays out the tasks we talked about and what the potential timelines could be. And again, feel free to avail yourself to that at the swantonplan.com site. And lastly, just thank you for coming out and it was a good session, good discussion, and it really looks like Swanton is moving forward, and this is part of an important process that will produce good things in the future.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Mayor.